This is Wellness Buds, and I'm your host, Stella Wingfield.
And I'm Laura.
Today's episode is inspired by the following quote. I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. Maya Angelou. If you or someone you know is a victim of sexual harassment, assault, and or abuse, you are not alone. I know I shared this on our Instagram page, but every 68 seconds an American is sexually assaulted. So just sharing this statistic again to reiterate, you are not alone. You can visit RAINN, RAINN.org for resources or call 1-800-656-4673 for additional support. So I really like this quote. As I just said, so many people are victims of sexual assault. It obviously changes us, but it doesn't have to reduce us. That event in your life does not define you, even though it's obviously super impactful. Our assignment was to watch Principles of Pleasure, which I thoroughly enjoyed and highly recommend. I don't think we'll be giving away too much, but if you haven't watched, maybe you should before listening, or not, whatever. It doesn't, do whatever you want to do, but just throwing that out there that we are going to be talking about things that were discussed on that show too. I wanted to start with the third episode of it because that directly correlates to Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and they do cover consent and sexual trauma. One quote that really stood out to me, which I highly debated making our inspirational quote in the beginning of this episode, but one of the sex educators on the show said, "Do I know anyone who has not experienced sexual trauma? Yes, that is the exception." Which, it's so sad that that is true. Yeah, then she goes on to say, though, that even if they haven't experienced sexual trauma, everyone experiences shame surrounding sex around our bodies. And I know I am not doing her quote full justice, but I think it just says a lot about our society that even those who haven't been sexually assaulted or haven't experienced sexual trauma still deal with the negative impacts of our society. I mean, even regarding our safety, where and when we walk, what we wear, when we walk at night, and so on. I think my dog is going a little crazy. Sorry for the extra noise, y'all.
It's okay. Elmer is presently going insane behind me. Yeah. The whole what you wear thing, that I feel like is the biggest movement against sexual assault. There has been a lot more talk of that in even just the past 5 years. Like, I don't know, I've seen so many signs at protests of what I wear is not consent and such. Mm-hmm. I wish there was more conversation about consent, as much conversation as there is about clothing. But, baby steps. I'll take what we can get and pray for more.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thankful that the whole conversation is even happening because I feel like consent hasn't been talked about enough. It's been talked about way more recently, but growing up, I don't really feel like I heard that much about consent necessarily. I don't know. I feel like the conversation 10 years ago just isn't the same as it is right now about it.
Yeah. Well, and it's so much bigger than no means no. I feel like there's so much no means no talk, and it's that is covering 20% of what consent is.
Right. I saw something recently, or it might have even a little bit been talked about in the Principles of Pleasure too, but if it isn't 100% fuck yes, then it's a no, Yeah. Silence is also no. Being still is also no. It's so much more than just no is no. I'm unsure, maybe, I don't know. All of that is no.
Exactly. And I mean, yeah, they do talk about it a little bit in Principle of Pleasure. It's okay, if there's 5 pieces of this experience, are you good with A, B, C, D, and E? You can say yes to some, and it doesn't have to be yes to all.
Right. And yes one day doesn't mean yes the next day.
Exactly. So, yeah, it is interesting. And I mean that for people that are the ones giving consent and the ones trying to receive consent. Because I think, sadly, it's 50-50 with the problem. I think a lot of people give consent because they don't really know no is truly an option.
Yeah. In power dynamic situations or just a lot of gray areas. You're allowed to say no.
Yeah, the expectation of, well, I'm supposed to say yes now.
Right. Or like, I was on board earlier, but my mood has changed, but now I feel bad because I already said yes. Like, that isn't a reason. You don't have to still say yes. Your mind can change. The way you feel in your body is
Mm-hmm.
allowed to change from 1 minute to the next, even. Like, not even hours gone by. Like, if any part of it makes you feel uncomfortable, you're allowed to change your mind. And the person that you're with has to respect it or should respect it, you know? Like, and if they don't, they're not the fucking one that you should be with or like in that situation with.
Exactly. And yeah, it's just very important. Um, with that being said, and consent and sexual traumas, um, I'm pretty open about it. I mean, people that are close to me know. My mom knows. I have gone through sexual assault when younger, and I don't know to what degree of it, but not being firm in lack of consent or eventually feeling like giving consent might be easier or letting go of control or something definitely played a role in mine. I was pretty young and I think I just was like, if this is what it is, then I guess I will just go with it. But there was definitely resistance at a point. But, assault is definitely hard on it. And I think as I've had years to reflect, because I am like 9 years away from my assault, which also probably makes this conversation a lot easier for me because it took like a year or a year and a half to even talk about it, is that I think a way larger percentage than we really want to recognize do not know they have assaulted, they are assaulting, or that they have been a part of assault. And that is not an excuse. It's not making that they have done it okay at all. But it brings up like the deeper reasoning of why assault probably is so prevalent in our society is a lack of conversation about consent and a lack of sex ed. Like, sex ed is more than just when we hit puberty telling us where hair grows, telling us. I mean, I remember in my birds and bees talks there being talk of like how there's different types of nipples on girls. I, as a female, did get like, you can say no, you don't have to do anything kind of thing. But I think at the beginning that might be a good start when I'm probably 12. But I think it's also harder for girls because you have to talk about periods and get through all of that first. We have a much more in-depth than just like, hey, you've started masturbating, which is normally where the males begin.
Right. But I feel like, too, it's like even though I might have heard the message, like, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do, but there was never a topic strictly on consent for men or boys at that age, to hear that message of like, you need to listen to the other person. And if, again, if it isn't 100% like they're totally in, then it's not it. You should not proceed.
Exactly.
Like, you need to listen to them. If you're intoxicated or whatever, like, different situations apply. If they are not conscious, that is not okay. But I definitely agree with you that more men or, more people participate in it without realizing that they're a perpetrator of it.
Yes. And like I said, it's not an excuse for it. I just do think consent, no means no is 20% of the conversation. Why are we skipping 80?
Yeah, totally. But yeah, I also have experienced, I'm just going to say straight up rape. And that was like 10 years ago. And this person straight up did not even acknowledge or recognize that what he did was rape. So I know that it has to be more prevalent than we even know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I do agree, and I just think society being so uncomfortable talking about sex has really led to the unfortunate situation.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, and with consent, there's also my mom, my parents definitely grew up with, I think, even less conversation about consent. And honestly, they go over this in the principles, but even like forced things as children, such as giving hugs to like family and such, and physical contact, not sexual, but physical contact that they didn't necessarily give consent to. And I think if you don't know it's a choice, again, do you even know if you wanted to hug them or not? Like the idea of do you want to do it was never brought up.
Right. And that should be a conversation at a really young age. Like you're saying,
Exactly.
like, you don't have to it's not mandatory for you to give a hug to your uncle or whatever if you don't want to. I actually gave a book to both my best friend's child and my nephew and niece called C is for Consent. And it is all about that as like a children's book. And I was just like, I actually saw it when I was dog sitting and house sitting. And I saw it there and I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like every child should have this book because from a young age, it's just important to know, like, you have a choice. You don't have to do anything that doesn't feel comfortable in your body. And especially for children who are neurodivergent, who don't even like touch to begin with, I feel like it's even more important for them to get that message of like, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. Especially when you're already like not that into touching or hugging or whatever. Like, you don't have to do shit you don't want to do. Everyone.
Yes. I mean, you don't even have to hug your mom if you don't want to.
Yeah. But I feel like having that message from like a really young age to help solidify that for both little girls and little boys and anywhere on the spectrum of gender, it's just like you should be aware of that from a young age because definitely that was not the case growing up for me.
Yeah. Like the conversation of consent should start as early as don't go trust strangers.
Yeah.
Start there. Because I remember that conversation pretty young. Let consent start that young too. And you shouldn't have to have a period to talk about consent.
True.
Because I think that's when a lot of people started. And that's not by like anyone's intentional misguiding or miseducation or lack of effort. I think every parent wants to prepare their child as much as possible. But society has also been like, sex should be off boundary, like, don't talk about sex. Sex is weird. It's like,
keep that shit to yourself.
Don't yuck in my yum. Don't they don't say ew when kids ask questions. And I mean, yeah, like even when she talks, there's a girl that talks about like her mom walked in many times on her masturbating in some form. And like, because she didn't have a lock on her door, and her mom never said anything, but like there was the look in the eyes of them both knowing, but her mom never brought it up. And it's like, it is natural. It's the lizard brain. And the fact that I was in my 20s when I learned about lizard brain should be the conversation.
I've never even heard that term before.
What? It's like your primal piece of your brain.
Oh.
Like, that's instinctual. And a lot of your pleasure and sexual things come from biological desire in your lizard brain.
I mean, I've heard like
we can talk more about that.
Animalistic
it's called the lizard brain.
Oh, yeah.
We can talk more about that next episode when we get to pleasure.
Yeah.
Because we have to have the hard conversations so we can have pleasure.
Yeah, because there is so much to enjoy and so many positive things around this topic, but I think especially just acknowledging the month that it is and bringing awareness and talking about it, like I was saying last episode, the only way to progress is to have hard conversations, and conversations that have traditionally been taboo or whatever, like we just don't talk about it. Like you were just saying with that mom and daughter, it's just like, we'll just pretend like this isn't happening, you know? And it's like, just sweep it under the rug and everything's fine. But it's conversations that need to be had, because it shouldn't be shameful to talk about this sort of thing. Even though it's like, you know, kind of embarrassing, just because it has been historically just this way of like, this is something we all experience, but we're just not going to talk about it. Like,
yes.
And I don't know, I do kind of wonder, like, culturally how different that is in other places versus the US, of, you know, but
yeah, I mean, in Pleasures, there is a Chinese woman who grew up in Hong Kong, and she talks about how it's even more conservative there. And so it is definitely not an isolated issue. I would hope there are some cultures that it's better.
I would think like some European countries would be like more open-minded in talking about that sort of thing. But, you know, I'm obviously not European, so I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And I think very subject to where, because...
True. Yeah,
I mean,
so true.
Ireland, definitely not. Look up Magdalene Laundries. They were hiding it all.
Yeah. And I feel like, too, when we think about history and thinking about the woman's role of, like, you're the wife, like, you got to do it. And it's like, no, it is not like that. It should never have been like that. But, like, that role of just, like, feeling obligated shouldn't be like that. Or even written into some, like, antiquated laws of, like, rape is allowed within marriage and it isn't considered rape.
Yeah, exactly. And, like, also remembering that, like, consent goes both ways. I do think Pleasures, the whole point of it is there is this orgasm gap with men and women. So Pleasures is very from the female perspective. That is not to discount men. It's that most of all of our sexual content is male dominated. You have had your voice, and this is about women having their voice in sexual content. And that doesn't mean men don't have consent. Men have consent. And that's, in any way, they have a choice of saying, I don't want to do it anymore at this exact moment in bed, or I don't like where you're touching while we're in bed. They're allowed to say it too.
Definitely. I just think that percentage-wise,
yes,
obviously the problem more so lies with men not listening.
Is definitely more prominent with women victims.
Yeah.
I just think there can be this perception that a male can't be a victim to sexual assault because we're so used to them dominating the space. And heterosexually and homosexually, men can be victims.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I have been looking a lot at statistics and stuff like that. And, men are definitely, and boys too, being so vulnerable as young children. It's like,
yes,
very
I
susceptible.
do think prepubescent, it is actually more common for a male to be a victim.
Yeah. From
what I have read, that is not any statistic that I've just read a lot about it. And it is more children-wise very common for male.
Yeah. I have read similar things, so I don't have a statistic to pop out right now. But
well, we can put a link to something. There will be a link.
We can put some resources on it.
I think it is important. I think the same with assault in general, not just sexual assault. It's so often like, well, he was being really rude and I slapped him. That's assault on him. You can't say, well, she's a woman, so I can't hit her. You just shouldn't hit each other in any non-consensual way.
Right.
Like, if you want to do it after both are like, I want that, go for it. But that, I hate the whole, like, pushing and slapping and stuff like that can only go one way. It's assault both ways.
Yeah.
And I just think if you want to stand up for women and their ability to give consent, you can't discount men either. They just need way less of a voice because they already have a bigger voice in society. But I do think sometimes it can get a little lost in translation.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to bring up for sure, because you really never know too, because I feel like all these statistics that we read about, it's so underreported because our system is just so fucked up of like people not even realizing what happened to them until way later, or not even trusting the system to do their job since such a low percentage actually ever see jail time. And it's just like, or people don't believe you and like make you feel fucking stupid for even trying to report it in the first place. It's like all these statistics, although it is great and I'm sure like pretty reliable, I can't help but to feel like it is super underreported and even more prevalent than we realize.
You know, it's underreported. It's very hard to actually press charges on. Also, I'm going to leave it to some personal research, but look up how many untested rape kits your state has, because it's way more than you think. And there are people that had a rape kit done 2 years ago that's still untested. Look up your state.
Yeah, it's
I will leave it at that.
disturbing.
I will go on a full rant, and look up your state. I hope yours is better than the one I know.
It's so sad.
It really is. But it is sad, but it's also, I think, depressing topics and uncomfortable topics often don't get talked about because no one wants to be the Debbie Downer, but none of it changes unless you talk about this stuff. There is one in Pleasures that says they like to talk about their sexual assault in a therapeutic way. Like, they talk to people about it because to them it feels therapeutic. I have definitely reached more of a point about talking about mine, or just, I prefer talking about how I've processed it and how I feel on it now and how I felt on it then than the actual happenings of my assault.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't matter. Everyone's assault is different, but they're all assault.
Mm-hmm. And it is how you process it and talk about it, which, to be honest, I still have a lot of processing and talking to do about it because I've never really talked about it like super in depth, the happenings, but also like me processing it. I feel like I just buried it down and like basically moved on with my life and pretended like it didn't even happen, when it's like, obviously, that's not a healthy way to go about it, but it's also just so overwhelming in the moment of everything in the aftermath. It's just like too much for the brain, or for my brain, to just like come to terms with the fact that I had just been violated in like such a traumatic way. So it's just easier to be like, I'm just gonna move on, you know?
Yeah.
But I feel like you were saying,
thinking about it so hard.
Yeah. But like you said, it's like yours happened 9 years ago. Mine happened like 10 years ago. I'm about to come up on my 10-year anniversary of it. So it's like way easier to talk about now than it was back then. But it's also just like, well, fuck. After reading like Know My Name. Did you ever read that, by the way?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. So after reading that, I was just like, damn. I really feel like I should have stood up for myself more and like gone down a hard path. I feel like in my instance, it actually would have been like a very easy thing to prove and have like actual proof of something without getting into the details of it. So I'm just like, man, it was kind of a missed opportunity to like actually get someone of like holding people accountable, because it's not okay for people to just be doing this shit and then like literally nothing happens.
Yeah.
One of those crimes where it's like society has just been like, well, you can do this and you can get away with it more times than not, which is just so fucked up to think if people want to commit a crime like that, the chances of anything actually happening is pretty minimal.
Exactly. I think it's a good transition to our
Product of the week.
Pow! As I say, kind of perky, but it's kind of like good content to get to. Is if you know younger kids or you have younger kids, C is for consent. Really good starting point. start the conversation younger. And it's like children literature, like I said, even when your parents, when they first start talking about sex and saying no, you can say no to things, you have to be in that situation, and leaving that to brew for a week or two and then readdressing it and getting, because having it all at once can be information overload and just hard to understand.
Yeah.
But if you're starting in a soft spot, like C is for Consent children book, it becomes an easier conversation in time.
Yeah, my best friend actually told me that it's her son's favorite book, that like he wants to be read that book over and over again. And I know he's on the spectrum as well, so I feel like it's extra, like it like really must resonate with him, or he must really like it, because she was like, it's so funny. He just keeps wanting me to read this to him. And I'm like, that really warms my heart, because I'm like, it's such an important message, and it is in like a very digestible way for children, since it is a children's book. So it is a good place to start for sure.
It is. If you're an adult and you've gone through it, and similar to Stella said, after reading Know My Name, it can be a little more like, did I process how did someone else experience something I've had? Or if you haven't gone through it and you want to hear from a victim who found a way to be very open, Know My Name is written by Chanel Miller, who is Brock Turner's victim. Mm-hmm. Brock Turner is one of the most public cases of sexual assault because he was a white boy that barely got any time because he was a good athlete, and who would want to ruin his life?
Yeah, his potential. That was actually, I don't know if you listened to last week's episode, but that was the POW, was Chanel's book. Yeah, so
go your kid way, go your adult way.
Yeah. Also, that I don't know if you watched those YouTube videos that I posted, but I'll post it on this episode too, just in case anyone wants to watch. And Laura, you should definitely watch if you haven't. But it was about a couple. They were like a couple in high school. He was a foreign exchange student, and they, were together for a little while, and he ended up raping her. But then he like moved back to his home country, and like they never talked about it, and she didn't even recognize that was rape at first. But then she reached out to him all these years later, and he owned up to his part in it and his responsibility, and they actually wrote a book together, and they did a TED Talk together, and they talked to audiences all over, which is just like a very interesting dynamic to have the perpetrator and the person who suffered from the assault, like, collaborating together and on this project. So it's a very interesting thing, since, talking about consent and all of that stuff too. It's just like,
yeah.
I was definitely moved by it, by just having that different perspective, and actually seeing a man own up to his shit, is like pretty refreshing.
It's a new dynamic for sure that you're rarely gonna get, even from those that fully process and heal. But also, let that be the hope that and the vision of healing can actually heal fully, and you can be capable of having a different relationship. I don't like whatever relationship they have, even behind the scenes, off the stage in talks, what healing can do. It's like a beacon of hope almost.
Yeah. And she was like, I'm not suggesting anyone to like confront their assailant or anything like that. What worked for us is not necessarily going to work for everyone. Like, you don't have to talk to that person at all, but everyone has a different way of healing. So it's interesting to see what different people's journeys can look like. So yeah, we'll link all that stuff below. And yeah, thanks so much for listening to this like serious episode.
Yes. Next week will be more fun.
Yeah, next week we'll talk about pleasure, and already setting in a warning to our parents. Like,
might be the one to skip.
Might be the one to skip, but maybe not. I don't know. Like, We shouldn't be embarrassed about it. We should be allowed to talk about things, but, whatevs.
You're also allowed to have boundaries, Mom. It's cool.
Yeah, it's chill. We do appreciate everyone for tuning in. If you have the time or energy to rate our podcast, that would be incredible, and it would really help people find our show. If you have anyone in your life that you think might enjoy listening, please share it with them. If you have any feedback, anything you would like to share regarding episode content, your personal journey, or if you just want to suggest future topics for us to cover, please reach out. Our number is 971-292-5565. You can either call or text that number, and it is anonymous, by the way. So you can say whatever the F you want to say. You could also message us directly on our socials or email us at wellnessbudspodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you, so please don't be shy. Thank you again for being here, and we'll catch you next week. Bye.
Bye.